Okay, I'm just going to pick up from where I left off. I kind of wish there was a way to share all of these things in a way that maybe wasn't so time consuming, maybe more digestible. But for now, this is just going to have to be my way of starting. So I'm not waiting for things to be perfect before I start. So, where I left off was talking about this reason and will that we have that's such a beautiful gift. Makes us in the image and likeness of God. And so God created us with this ability that allows us to love. And that is an incredible gift because it's literally what we were made for. So to be without the ability to do it is just inhuman. Doesn't even make any sense. And so yeah, it's such an incredible gift to get to share in the ability to love, which also allows us to be able to understand what it means to be loved in a different way than other things in creation ever could. So, yeah, wow. And at the moment, I'm just going to pause that and talk about how, in addition to humans and to the universe and to everything that we know in creation and all the things we don't know in creation, he also created the angels. So angels are these beings that are higher than us in being. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're more important or have more dignity per se, or necessarily even are loved more. I'm just trying to be careful of all my distinctions and not say the wrong thing, but they are still higher than us. And I think we just tend to not have a concept of hierarchy in the order of being, because we're very familiar with just superiority and inferiority on a dignity level, on a level of the way people are treated, and this is nothing like that. But they are higher than us in the order of being, and they're more powerful, and they have a more powerful intellect. And so these beings that God created, they also have a will that can choose freely, but it works differently than ours. And so for them, and keep in mind they have an intellect that is way beyond what we can imagine. It's not infinite like God, but it's just, as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure that they basically have access to all of the information, knowledge that they need to know. So they don't have the knowledge of everything like God does. But when it comes to what they need, it's there. And so also their will works differently, where when they choose, their choice echoes out in an everlasting way. So they're not eternal, they're created, but in terms of everlasting, time is limited, eternity is not. So in an everlasting way, their choice echoes on. So they don't change their mind and do this thing and then do that thing in the way that humans do. And so they also are able to love. And they have had this opportunity to either accept the love of God and love him in return, or not to. And so what happened is that some chose to accept the love of God and love him in return, to be his servants, to glorify him, to worship him, and some chose not to. And we don't know, exactly how that did or didn't happen, but kind of our customary understanding is that, and some of this we do know, and some of this is our customary understanding, that there was an angel higher than all the others, named Lucifer, which means light bearer, and that he chose not to love God in return, not to accept the love of God, even though God loved him very, very much. And so our customary understanding is that he said, I will not serve. And people's theory is that he knew about the future incarnation of God the Son as a human man, and that he knew about the Virgin Mother. And if you don't know what any of that means, we'll get to it later. But a tremendous act of humility from God, of all, of everyone, God being humble. It's a wild thought. And that Lucifer, was not willing to serve a God who would become man, and not willing to serve his queen mother, who would be just a pure human, not even divine. And so our customary understanding is that Lucifer said, I will not serve. In some way or another, that was what he communicated. That was his free choice. And that free choice is one that he echoes out, for always. And that a lot of angels followed him in that refusal of God's love. And because love has to be a free choice, there's no forcing of God. Like that's just sort of an absurd idea. I think we tend to think that because like that if something is powerful, then it will act on this ability to coerce or oppress or force something. And that's just not not the way it works with love. There's not, it's just not a thing of reality for love to be forced. Just impossible. Contradiction of the nature of love. So God allowed him to choose not to love. And that meant having to make a quote-unquote space. Space is not the same as the human concept of space, that is like in the material realm, but a spiritual space, so to speak, where the devil could, and also at this point, Lucifer is now referred to as Satan. Sometimes people still refer to him as Lucifer, depending on like what they're trying to communicate, but at this point, he's now called Satan, and his followers are called devils, or the devil, or demons. And he allowed them to sort of spiritually move as far away from him as possible. And that's what hell basically is. And so God is everywhere because it's in the nature of being infinite, that there's no space materially or spiritually that God does not occupy in some way. And once again, it's a mystery how exactly he occupies it, because we do have an understanding of God being more and less present in more or less present in a way. But perhaps it would be more correct to think of it as, God is present everywhere, but, especially with like beings that can choose, there's an ability to not allow him to be present in that space in the same kind of way. And that is where there's this sort of absence, so to speak, even though God is still present there in the sense of like on a level of being. So this could get extremely philosophical. We don't necessarily need to go that deep, but I do think like it matters maybe a little bit for people to understand, so it doesn't seem like there's all these contradictions, when actually, if you are like being very detailed, they're not there. But yeah, so God is omnipresent is what we say, present everywhere. But somehow there's an ability for, especially on a spiritual level, for these devils, which are fallen angels, to be in a sort of spiritual space where the fire of God's love is not as intense somehow. And because they hate God and they've rejected him, it's painful for them to be so close to that fire of love. And it doesn't stop loving them, because God is love. There's a sense in which you can speak of a sort of, I hesitate to even use the word hatred, but God utterly like how do I explain this? Like he never stops loving, and yet there's an absolute revulsion towards like what is not good, from God. And so anyway, you can just think of God as like this fire of love that is painful for a being that has rejected that. And so there's this sort of spiritual space where they're able to be further away from that, even though God is everywhere in some way that we don't fully understand. And that is called hell. We think of it as eternal separation from God. If we're being super technical, God is omnipresent. But insofar as you can speak of being separated from God, that is what hell is. And it's eternal. So yeah. Wow. What a tragedy. So Lucifer, who then became Satan, and every other angel that followed him become fallen angels, which are now called demons or devils. And ultimately, God did not create evil or suffering. God is all these perfections, like it was mentioned before. And these perfections are whole. We have maybe different ideas of the word perfection, but I think a good understanding of the word has to do with when something is made up of parts, that all those parts are there, so it's whole. But now you take God, and God is not made up of parts, because God isn't made up of matter. He's not made at all. He's always existed. He is the source of existence, the source of all being. He is being itself. So he's not made up of parts. And so that takes perfection to a whole nother degree, because it's not just a matter of all these parts being present to create a whole. It's the fact that like there could somehow there's being itself, God, that it does not have parts. And so it's a completely different type of wholeness, to not even be made up of parts and to be the source of all parts, that have been created. And so imperfection is a lack of something, like not being there. It's not even possible for God to not be perfect, because he's the source of everything. So like he can't be missing anything. He can't be missing any love. He can't be missing any truth or goodness when he's the source of those things. There's a beautiful quote from Thomas Aquinas in one of the songs that he wrote for the Eucharist. And once again, if none of what I just said made sense to you, that's okay, because it's something you can learn later. But in this beautiful song he wrote, he says, "Truth himself speaks truly, or there's nothing true." And yeah, so when you think of evil, don't think of it as something that God created, because it's not. God created things to have a particular nature. So nature, once again, goes back to like what a thing is, or if it's a person, a who. It's about what that who is, or what that thing is. But it's also like what that thing is, or what that person is especially defined by the purpose of that thing, or by the purpose of that person. And our purpose has to do with our being capable of God, being a kapax Dei, capable of receiving God's love, capable of returning it. An old catechism said that we are here to know, love, and serve God in this life, so as to be with him in the next. And that's something that when you're, at least back in the day, when you're raised Catholic, like you learn like that is the meaning of life. So from the time you're a child, you understand like I was made to be with God. And that really is the source of our happiness, or the fulfillment, I should say, of our happiness, because we're made for God. It's impossible for us to be fulfilled without God, specifically without the union with God. And so, sorry, I've got my bed is moving away from the wall. Anyway, yeah, so imperfection, evil, or I should say that evil is imperfection, but not perhaps a modern understanding of imperfection, but evil is specifically when something should be present and it's not present, it's absent. So God is all goodness. When he makes something that's good, and then that good thing departs from the fullness of what it was made to be, that's what we call evil. So everything that God has created has a purpose. And when its purpose isn't being fully met, when not all the parts are there, when everything's not ordered correctly and well and working well, so to speak, that's an absence of the good way that God created it. And that imperfection is evil. And so rather than, this concept that sadly gets so many people in trouble, as if, God created evil, We have to realize that whatever beings that are capable of free will, so angels and humans, they have the ability to reject God. They have the ability to not live up to their whole purpose, to literally go against their nature. And so, of course, by going against their nature, they're missing something that was meant to be there. They literally cannot be fulfilled without choosing those things which are consistent with our own nature. And what's consistent with our own nature is to be loved by God and to love Him in return. And so whenever that's missing, that is where evil comes in. That is what evil is for us as well as for the angels that fell. And so, yeah, we want fulfillment. We want to love God. We want to allow Him to love us. And I will be back with more next time. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. All glory be to God. Amen.